HBA is. I need to speak a bit louder. Can everybody hear me? Yeah? Okay, great. It's the second time at this event. I was here, I think, 5, 6 years ago, and I'm happy to see that it's bigger and it's more exciting and there's lots of things happening and a great turnout. But it's the first time that I'm talking to you guys here, and I'm really excited. So we will talk about how we, as designers for HBA, create luxury hotels and create iconic properties. So I will talk about how we get there, the whole journey from start to finish. But before I do that, I wanted to present a little bit the overview of who we are. So HBA is an international design firm. We have been around for quite some time, started in the 60s in LA and gradually rolling into different countries. So in London, we have been since 1987. And you will see here in this map, I think it kind of reflects how the economy has picked up in Asia and in different countries and the kind of presence that we have. So from London, we work in Europe, in North Africa, in the Middle East, we work in Russia. But if a client wants us to work in Asia, we will do that, we will go all the way there. And actually last week I also saw one of our projects in Macau, which is on the Forbes luxury spa list, and that's something that we did with our team from London. So just an overview that our work really spans many, many continents. So we focus on the luxury segment. We're #1 hospitality giant. You'll find us on Condé Nast hot lists and awards, Gold Key Awards, AHEAD Awards, and much recognition in our industry. So let's go. I'm going to take you on a journey around the world. We work with all these brands, and they have presence in different countries. These are all the big established players. They are the names that we all know. They have their brand standards, and we adhere to them. But we also work with more independent, smaller owners, local properties in Europe and elsewhere. And we managed to do both with the same excitement and an approach for good design. So how do we start? Sometimes you'll be surprised that we might get a request to start a project and it's just a plan from somewhere, and we've provided a quotation and the client will ask us to get going. But for us, it's very important to know where we are, what is the envelope, what is the architectural envelope, what does the neighborhood look like, the climate. So you'll see here, sometimes it could be a historic property, which is in Spain with a particular nice character. Other times in Italy, we have Tuscan landscape and a materiality that influences what we do. In Switzerland, we worked on an urban hotel. And again, this is important to visit and kick off a meeting with clients and walk around, experience the neighborhood. This location here is right on the hillside outside Zurich. So even though it's urban, it also has nature on the other side of the hotel. And this duality in character influenced the way we addressed our concept inside, doing many contrasts between urban and nature. So how do we do iconic? How do we create that wow factor, identifying what the big gesture is in a space? In the Alpina, it's a hand-painted ceiling from the 19th century, and really working around that to make everything fit in and sit in harmony. Also making it warm, because it's quite a large space that has many different people move through. It's a lobby, it's a lounge, people check in, so many different functions. It's also identifying sometimes areas that can be problematic, something that looks like a very, very narrow kind of like walk-through between spaces, creating seating moments, populating it with furniture. Here, the approach is to create seating groups that feel like they have always been there and don't feel dated. So this is a fresh planning in this space. There's ornamental ceramic tiles and a vocabulary here from the building that we take in. And we also soften it with planting and create a very nice kind of in and out connection. We look up and around and everywhere and try to create vistas and symmetry. You'll see how this pendant is just slightly off where it's hanging at the top. to ensure that it does hang straight in the middle of that really nice stairwell. And we identify the heart of the hotel very, very early on. So we identify which ones are these spaces which are going to be the talk of the town, what are the memories that the guests will take with them. And very, very often these are the places where they involve food and drink and the people getting together and enjoying themselves. So they are F&B spaces, they are bars, and they could be most often than not now part of a bigger kind of like lounge. They're not hidden away somewhere. We continuously are asked to break down walls and really bring everything in together. So there is movement in all places of the hotel. There is energy. There's fewer numbers of staff. Staff can control areas without having to have barriers, so they can visibly kind of control all these areas from an operational perspective. This bar is in the Orient. It's kind of like one of those very successful all-day spaces. So a year after it was open, I was happy to be there and see the neighborhood kind of being in this space. So in the morning, it's full with people. At lunchtime, the locals come and have a chat and have a bite to eat. In the afternoons, at all times of the day and night, this space is successful and works really, really well. At other times when we have a specialty bar and there is a small footprint, in this scenario we had a very small space, but we had the high ceilings to play with. So we create drama even if it's a small space. We add mirrors and reflections. We also care about the details. So you'll see here the embroidery at the back of the chair. We care about how you feel when you touch something. It should be a nice touch, and everything counts, all these touch points in our design. When a space has to be really practical and accommodate, breakfast settings and a large number of guests, we have to go streamlined sometimes and keep it really clean and easy to maintain. But also think about how this sits right next to, for example, that, which is a Michelin star dining right on the same floor in the same hotel in Zurich. And we work with a lot of good people in our industry, and we have the privilege to learn from them. Here we're working with Jeffrey Zakarian in Qatar. So we are in this kind of trialogue between operator and owner and designer. We have another player, which is the chef, and he has his values and he stands for certain things. He knows how he wants to run the restaurant, how he wants the kitchen to operate. So we sit around the table and make it work for them. So as we speak, these chairs that you see there are being mocked up, and Jeffrey has signed them off. It's really important also for us to be sometimes a mediator between somebody who hasn't been exposed to a different market. So this chef hasn't had a restaurant in the Middle East. We work there a lot, and we know what the client is asking for, or the clientele. They're very keen that, seats are comfortable. They want seats with arms. They spend time around the table. So taking all these kind of considerations on board. So both sides are pleased, and we are happy with the design that we're doing. So this is one of the restaurants that is coming up from the work that we've got on the boards right now. Other times we design spaces and we don't always know who the chef will be when they come in. And this is, again, in Italy, where Gordon Ramsay is running one of the restaurants for Borgo Monastero. So that's a nice surprise as well in the end. Many times when we have renovation projects, and in Europe predominantly they are renovation projects rather than new builds. In emerging economies, they tend to be new build, new properties. So when we have existing conditions, we have to adapt to what it is on site. And in this picture, you'll see a nice kind of cozy setting by the window. You'll see how high up the window is, because this used to be a Templar house. And we had to dig deep in the basement to give them a ceiling height, so make that habitable. It turns into a suite. And work around what you would say is nothing straight. So none of these walls are straight. They were all made a long, long, long time ago. So our design really is influenced by that. We can't fix things on the walls. We can't make made-to-order furniture. Everything has to be loose to sit in that room. But it also gives it a more residential feel and a more welcoming feel. Other things that pop up during the design process that we sometimes are not prepared about are little surprises, like a tile that comes up at excavation that we find that is an old tile and it's broken, and we take that and we print it and we recreate it to have authenticity in this property. So you'll see that the tile there is something that we've done in that way. So still on the subject of being influenced by what is the envelope, here you'll see the soft lines of a room being recreated again in the curves of the furniture, so giving it a very soft, feminine and intimate touch. And when we can do a grand statement, we will. So if we have really, really high ceilings and we have the opportunity to do a 4-poster bed or bring paneling all the way up, we always try to find and I would say exploit these kind of like design opportunities to make the best of the spaces that we have. This one is from the 10 Trinity Suites in London, a Four Seasons hotel, very, very traditional, just like this one, the Maria Cristina in Spain. So for all these projects, as a designer, it's important to know what brand they are. So each of one of these luxury brands have different values. And we may sometimes as designers want to push the envelope a lot more, but we have to really respect what the brand speaks for. So if the brand is asking for more restraint, even though personally as designers we would like to push things more, we respect that and we create something that represents them, without also compromising the grandeur that the client is asking for. Now I'll move over to talk about scales and proportions, and this particular space is a spa reception entry and a little waiting space next to it. So once all the planning is done, the big ideas are down, we've done renderings, we get down to the detail. Many times this involves creating bespoke installations, and before this is done we have to almost calculate how many of these bulbs would we need. I, as a rule of thumb, always order more than we think we need, 3 times more sometimes. And then we go on site and we hang these things up, and it's always kind of good to know that it's as full as we wanted it to be. I think there's nothing more depressing than a lighting installation that just has very few lights and just looks poor. I would sometimes just take it off if it doesn't look the way it should look. Hanging things at the right height is also something that I personally am very fussy about. You'll see here that this, in the first image, is hanging quite high because there's a lot of circulation, people standing in front of that reception desk. You don't want to kind of interrupt them, but on the second scenario, you have slowed down your pace, so you're not really moving in and out fast. You're already in your spa relaxation mode. And underneath that, there's a series of coffee tables with displays and accessories. So you will move around that chandelier. You'll be able to see it up close. And while you're sitting there having a tea, it will help you have kind of like more intimate lighting rather than something overhead. This is at rendering stage. So in public spaces, we have to go grand and use a big scale. So this, again, is something that we have to almost calculate in our heads and think about, and sometimes do some guesswork. And when everything gets drawn up, then we think, how big are those elements in the ceiling? How do we divide that space, which is an operational space, if I want to break it down to different rooms? And also how, in this grand scale, we bring the same kind of level of detail in pre-function spaces. So they also look kind of like well thought through when these big kind of like crowds break into this space, so it's still interesting and and for them exciting to be in that space and to stay there longer. Then when we go to guest rooms, then the scale then comes down again to human scale and intimacy. So here, this room, the focus here is the location. We're right on the water. We look out, so we don't want to detract from the view. If we're in a resort location, we don't want to really be inside. We want to be outside. But here with that ceiling coffer, if you're sitting on the bed and looking out towards the window, there's still something attractive. When we have high ceilings, like here we had like a 4.5 meter, and we've got a screen, the golden screen that you see here, that positioning of the lamp is all we need to bring that sense of intimacy. So you'll see the height of that, the way that it kind of gently offers almost like the feeling of a canopy next to the sofa. Now, sense of place. So you'll see already by now that we cover lots of countries, and there is not really one style that we design for. So every time it's identifying where we are, what is that sense of place that we want to communicate. If we're in the Alps, for example, it's the weathered wood, it's the very natural finishes, the warmth. If we're in a cold climate that we want to kind of talk about and feel cozy, we want to light the fire. If we're in Spain again, and we know that they have Moorish and North African influences in their history, we want to talk about that because that is what makes Seville really, really special in comparison to, say, for example, somewhere else in Spain. So we will exaggerate these details. We'll bring them in not just in the architectural details, but also in the fabrics, on the seating, on the, the little table that has a Moroccan influence and so forth. And then jumping over to Amsterdam, where we have a brand which is all about lifestyle and all the fun you can have in Amsterdam, very, I would say, Dutch in a way, and Dutch design is harder. So you see this design is very kind of, it has personality, a sense of color, but it also talks to a younger audience. And this is a renovation property. So again, we have a lot of site conditions and different levels that we have to make it work. We have to bring it all together and create one space. We've created these series of little seating areas which act as steps. So you slowly step down to the bar. You can also sit there and perch. And in Amsterdam, you have this kind of informality. They don't really do grandeur, but they are easy. And it's important that we reflect that in our design. And in Jerusalem, centuries of history and good old times are reflected in this bathroom, again, with the warm metals, feeling as if they've always been there. So when we don't do the big statement, it's important, I think, in a hotel to have also low-key areas. It's not always the big wow factor. So these are balanced always with areas that you can have a quiet moment, you can relax, and still have this sense of serenity. And this is by the pool, an indoor pool in the Orient. We have light coming in from the ceiling. We've got a really nice, black waterfall, which you'll see at the end of this picture and later on in one of the other ones. And then this feeling of calm in the guest room, so you can relax. We work with symmetry to create vistas, center things. We think about photography, what happens when this room is up for sale on the internet. We want it to look great. Centering doors and creating those kind of like views and moments. That's the waterfall I was talking about. And again, connecting spaces. Where I'm standing taking this photograph is right next to a treadmill. So you may be working out, but you can still have a nice view and make the most of that waterfall. We know that the client has spent much money on this pool, so we don't want to close it off completely. We want to show it off in many ways as possible. But also screen it. So if you're relaxing, like you are there, you have the drapes, those metal kind of chain drapes to provide privacy. Many times we have things like columns right in the middle of a room where we've got a restaurant. This is an example in St. Petersburg where we wanted to have an open space, so nothing really built around in the center. And what we've done here is we've cladded it with selenite and created a really nice abstraction of a birch tree. And that's a tree that you'll find in the landscape further out in St. Petersburg. Other times we have issues with, what's stacking above, and this is the view that you'll see if you're floating in the pool in the Raffles Hotel Spa and looking up. So this is the scenario where we've got daylight coming in from the top, but we're a part of a big development. So this spa is a 4,000 square meter spa with hammams, female areas, segregated men areas where they get together, like party hammams, a very Istanbul kind of ritual and very popular thing to do with people getting together. And all these spaces feed into the pool. They all lead here. But the spa being part of a bigger development with residential and shopping malls and offices being part of a big development, we had issues of looking through down to the pool. So you'll see those floors above are from offices and they are walkways. So what we didn't want there was anybody kind of like walking around in their business, looking down to somebody relaxing. So without really screening it off or compromising the daylight, what we did was a very light touch. So we used a lighting element to create shadows, something that looks great in the evening. In the day, the scale around the atrium has gotten smaller, so you probably wouldn't even know why we did that. So talking about light, it's very important to bring light in some spaces that can be really quite deep and large. This one is from Grosvenor House, and if you knew it before the renovation, it was very dark. It's right next to Hyde Park as well, so we want to open up to the greenery of the park. So in this scenario, using the mirrors in the ceiling helps us kind of like multiply that light. But when we don't have light, we'll celebrate the dark spaces and we'll identify what these spaces are early on when we look at the master plan and we find out where things are, and we'll move things around so that if we have compromised conditions, we can make the most of it from like a hidden downstairs basement bar, like a surprise space. Or a billiards room, a playroom, somewhere to play cards or to get together, somewhere you forget what time of the day or night it is. Or indeed, in the conference facility, it's creating a cinema and screening rooms, like this one here in London. And then color and drama. So color really helps us add that kind of like drama effect to our work. And in hospitality, we're really quite fortunate that we can push the envelope more with colors. If you compare it to residential design where somebody lives every day, you would be very, very careful to go really, really strong. In a suite where you might spend a night or a couple of nights or a week, it's okay. It adds to kind of like the difference and the memory that you take back with you, somewhere that you probably wouldn't be your house. In restaurants, we use pistachio, like a very appetizing color, the green. We think about how food will look like in spaces like that. Or we go really, really strong and bold with red. And this is a space that would be predominantly used in the nighttime. So the red wouldn't really be as bright as you see it here. It would all be toned down. And again, in guest rooms, going down pastels and making that serene and comfortable. I'm going to move over to the subject of art. I talked about art about a month ago at Maison. We had a really nice panel discussion. Art is a big part of what we do. We want to think about it really early on when we design something. It's not an afterthought at the end. We work with a lot of art consultants to get the right pieces in the right places. We want the budgets to be allocated early on so we know that we have allowed for the pieces to be there. One would separate art, public art, from guest room art. There's a question of funds and availability. When you have 300 rooms, you have to be careful what it is that you're suggesting, because if it's too expensive, it's not going to happen. So you have to be, in a way, practical and kind of in your thinking very early on. This is inexpensive art. This is just posters, working with the museums, the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. It's also, some of them are like a collectible little kind of Miffy doll at the top. Again, very playful Dutch touch. And other times we have access to owners' art collectors, which is nice as well. And sometimes they influence what we do. Like a strong color has influenced this particular study in a suite. And we are also fortunate in some projects to have collectible art. So in the Alpina, for example, where the clientele is that kind of level, where they will have their own art collections, they will walk around and they will be able to identify which artists they are. They might even have them in their house. So here art budget exceeded the FF&E budget, as an example. In Schiphol in Amsterdam, this hotel was owned by Schiphol Real Estate, who owns the airport. So they came up to us with a collection that spanned about 40 years. So the airport had started collecting art pieces to showcase around from the 60s, and they purchased every year either Dutch artists or artists that were working with or we're talking about travel or movement or skies, anything that had to do with airport, but not very literal. So there's never an airplane in the art that they had collected. And what happened was that throughout the years, they replaced all these nice pieces in the airport with advertisement and digital screens. So these beautiful pieces found themselves down in a basement in a building right next to the airport. And while we were designing the hotel, they said, we have these pieces. Do you want to do anything about them? I was like, fantastic. We went down, we looked them all, we talked with the curators. I now know many stories behind each one of these. So, for example, this one is the artist himself. It's almost like a self-portrait, but a duality. So both the people in that conversation on that picture is the same person. And we created a moment of contemplation around it with a chess table and the big wingback chairs. So when that happens, it's unexpected. We work around it. We'll be able to move things around and also curate with them and decide where pieces go. So if it's something very high value, we will put it in the highest suite, or we'll put it in a public space. So they're also kind of like looked after. People can come into the hotel and walk around and take enjoyment in these pieces. But also art gives us the opportunity to push the boundaries and also go edgy and be a little bit more provocative. When we don't have things on the wall, we might think early on about how we're going to decorate that wall. In this case, we've got a hand-painted chinoiserie. And also layered it. So layering, accessorizing is a big part of what we do. Bringing that homey feeling to a home away from home. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we have different kind of like energies in a hotel, and how, depending on where you are and the type or the mood you're in, is something that we as designers take on. So sometimes you're in a hotel, you're on the go. You don't want to have dinner in a slow pace. You're working, you want to plug in, you want to get your laptop set up while you're like drinking your coffee. So these are all kind of things that we think about early on when we design, tables, we allocate PowerPoints. These are years before this is ready. So we have to think forward about the way people move and work and live these days. And also about what happens sometimes in spaces when there is no real purpose to them. There's kind of like some connection spaces. There's a ballroom next door. This is a walkway through. So putting a sense of purpose in areas that would otherwise look that they're very kind of deserted. So what we've done here is we've created a purpose by doing a bespoke lighting and installation, by populating it with furniture that is all loose. They can take all of these away and they can do pop-up events. They can rent this space out because now it looks great and it's very attractive. Or they can have like spillover from their breakfast restaurant, which is next door. When it's time to unwind, we put a lot of effort in the spas as well as the rest of the hotel. We've got a big kind of spa portfolio of works over the years. And sometimes what happens with spas is... Hello? Yeah, okay, back again. They sometimes get left behind. So in the program of a hotel, you will start and, obviously the rooms are first. So the owners want to get that out of the way, the big numbers, to know what the room is like. We start tackling the public areas, but somehow F&B sometimes falls behind, and the spa even more so. I think because it's a very technical space and it takes a lot of attention. There needs to be a spa consultant on board, and while everything is going on, for some reasons, I guess, in every project, it's the last one to open. But it's important for us to really think about the spa early, even though they might, fall behind in program. And you realize, I sometimes, when I visit hotels, realize, and I can tell if I move through the hotel, who has done the spa, if it's the same designer, if it's somebody else, if it's been an afterthought, if they run out of money and they just had to open it. It's very obvious once you start thinking about it. So the spas are being very technical spaces. You have to think about drains and water and electricity. You have to think about mood and ambience. Lighting has to be very relaxing. You don't want to have many things in the ceilings. There's air and M&E, a lot of like heavy M&E. So these spaces that look kind of like very serene hide a lot of complexity behind them. So when we design, we try to take all these things on board and resolve all these issues, so then the guest can really focus on, you know, the nice wavy wall here or the feeling of serenity. In this changing room, for example, you'll see there's a little kink at the top of that joinery, and that's where we have air supply, or return, I think. Behind the mirror as well, there's lighting under the vanity, so it doesn't look like a dark corner. There's PowerPoints that are there, but you can't see them because of the setup. So a lot of like hidden things. You'll see the drawers there, the wardrobes with the sliding doors hiding all the bits that a therapist would need. So then when you enter the room, it's clean, it's tidy. There's no trolleys with machinery and these things that come out later after the lights are down and you're on a massage table already. So when I was talking about power outlets and things like that, we already know early on that we'll have something really nice decorative in this massage room in the Raffles Spa, so allowing for all these things to be able to do them in the end. This one is in Amsterdam again, and if you're sitting on that lounger, you can see that the plane's touching down at the airport next door. So even though this is an airport spa, you have a chance to really kind of forget for a moment where you are. If you're staying there for a night, you can have a moment to kind of like relax in an airport hotel. So behind that walls, there's a sauna and a steam room. They all have windows that look out. So really maximizing the potential of an otherwise very small space. This has only got 4 treatment rooms and a small pool. So talking about light and how it makes us feel good in the morning, I think it's important to kind of like draw the curtains and be able to have the daylight. In this scenario, we've got quite a large ceilings, but a very tiny window. So we've kept the palette quite light to kind of accentuate that. If we can draw even the bathroom kind of doors open, we do. Here it's a window that connects the bed with the bathroom. Getting up ready for the day with having breakfast again in daylight. So positioning this restaurant on this really nice glass facade. And then, of course, the outside, which is sometimes in these resort hotels, a mountain resort is just where you want to be. Although we're interior designers, we work a lot outside as well. It will take coordination with a landscape designer, so we will identify which areas there are where we want to populate, where we want people to relax. We'll think of rhythms and setups and creating moments in that landscape. And it's all about kind of making the most. If we know that this window's got a great view, we'll point the loungers to look out. If it doesn't have a good view, they'll be pointing into something nicer. We want to make the most of blue sky. So if there's a terrace, it's encouraging people to go up there and creating these images that somebody will see on their website. And they'll say, okay, I can picture myself being there, having a drink in the evening. Let's book that room. There was a study actually a few years ago which said that if a hotel has a pool or a spa, there's, I think, a 60% more chance of booking it, even if in the end you don't use it. So the attraction of having water and, you know, a wellness element in a property was such that it made you kind of almost allow, in case you had some time, sometimes in conferences you don't, for example, to be able to use it. This is in India. We had a really nice balcony that overlooked the botanical gardens, and again, really thinking about it as if it was an internal space, accessorized and soft and decorated in that way. So connecting with nature is something that is really close to our hearts. and opening up to everything that's right in front of us. So we as designers know that we have to look after what's inside, but as people we know that if you're there you don't want to be looking at the wall so much, but you want to be looking out at the lake. The same with this pool, so again opening up the windows there. This is a project that is coming up. We're working in Croatia, and this is a waterside resort hotel. Here we want to focus again on the out. We've got a kind of like a nautical vibe going on in the ceiling, but otherwise very kind of like gentle in harmony and really making the most of the location. So I hope that by now I've kind of shown you how we get to where we get to with these hotel properties around the world. This is another opening that we've got in a month's time, and I think it will be a landmark in Zagreb. It's a bank conversion, an old bank building from the 1920s. We're creating a 110-room hotel. It's all happening on site. I get texts every morning and updates, and I'm there next week. So this is happening. A small boutique hotel in Zagreb, and a really nice breakfast room for those who are staying there. So just to round up, thank you very much for your time and turning up. And I hope you enjoyed our work. Thank you. If you have any questions, I'm here. Yeah. Thanks.